Malik Johnson walked into the restaurant alone, dressed simply in a dark t-shirt and jeans. No designer suit. No flashy watch. Just quiet confidence. The hostess barely glanced up before pointing toward a small corner table near the kitchen, far from the glowing chandeliers and premium seating. Malik didn't complain. He sat down calmly, unfolding his napkin like someone with nothing to prove. Around him were wealthy guests, business executives, politicians, influencers, laughing over expensive wine. A few eyes lingered on Malik, curious, some judgmental. In a place where image mattered, he didn't seem to fit. What no one knew was that Malik had built this restaurant from nothing. 10 years earlier, it was an empty building with broken windows. Tonight, it was fully booked, and every plate, every paycheck, every light above their heads existed because of him. Malik glanced around the dining room, taking in the soft music, the polished floors, the carefully trained staff moving with practiced precision. Each detail carried a memory. He remembered scrubbing those same floors himself late at night, hands raw from cleaning chemicals, wondering if the risk he'd taken would ever pay off. He remembered being turned away by banks, investors who smiled politely but never called back, and people who assumed a man like him didn't belong in spaces like this. This visit wasn't accidental. Malik had decided to come in anonymously, without warning the management. He wanted to know what the experience felt like for an ordinary guest, especially one who didn't look wealthy on the surface. He believed leadership wasn't about sitting in offices or reading reports. It was about understanding reality as it truly was. The waiter eventually approached his table, moving quickly, his expression distracted. He didn't introduce himself or make eye contact. "Yeah?" he asked, pen poised impatiently over his notepad. Malik ordered politely, his voice calm, his words respectful. He asked a simple question about the menu, but the response he received was sharp and dismissive, as if his presence were an inconvenience rather than a customer to be served. Malik felt a familiar sting, not anger, but recognition. He had felt this before. Years ago, when he walked into meetings wearing borrowed jackets, when people spoke over him or past him, assuming he wasn't important. Back then, it had fueled his determination. Tonight, it tested something else, his principles. As the waiter walked away, Malik noticed a couple at a nearby table exchange glances. One man frowned, uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. Another guest looked away entirely, pretending not to notice. The room kept moving, but a quiet tension lingered around Malik's table, unseen yet heavy. Malik took a slow breath and folded his hands. He wasn't here to create a scene. He wasn't here for revenge. This restaurant had been built on a single idea: respect creates success. If that idea was failing anywhere, even once, he needed to know. He pulled out his phone, not to complain online or call attention to himself, but to send a short message to the general manager. Just 5 words: "I'm dining in tonight. Observe." As he waited for his meal, Malik looked around again, this time with pride rather than nostalgia. The dream had survived. It had grown. But dreams, he knew, needed constant care. One careless attitude, one unchecked assumption, could undo years of hard work. Tonight wasn't about reminding people who he was. It was about reminding them what the restaurant stood for. The waiter assigned to Malik's table arrived late and visibly annoyed. His shoulders were tense, his movements rushed, as if this table were already a burden before a word had been spoken. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't smile. He didn't ask how Malik's evening was going. "What do you want?" he asked flatly, pen tapping against the notepad. Malik looked up, meeting his eyes without challenge or fear. He politely ordered a steak, medium rare, and a glass of water. No wine. No appetizers. No extras. The waiter let out a short scoff, one that carried more meaning than sound. "You sure you can afford that?" he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. A nearby table went silent. Forks paused. A woman slowly lowered her glass. The air shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Malik looked up again, surprised but calm. Years of experience had taught him the power of restraint. "Yes," he replied evenly. "That'll be fine." The waiter rolled his eyes. "We don't do substitutions here," he said, flipping the notepad shut. "And don't take too long. We've got real customers waiting." That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But heavy. It wasn't just the words, it was the assumption behind them. The judgment made in seconds, based on clothes, skin, and silence. Malik felt it settle in his chest, not as anger, but as clarity. This wasn't about him personally. This was about something bigger. Malik nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said calmly. The waiter turned and walked away, shaking his head. Malik sat back in his chair, his hands resting flat on the table. He noticed how his heart rate hadn't changed. 10 years ago, it would have. Back then, moments like this burned. They pushed him to prove something, to explain himself, to demand respect. Now, he understood something far more powerful: respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be taught. Around him, the restaurant slowly returned to motion. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. A man at the next table glanced over, clearly uncomfortable. Another guest avoided looking at Malik altogether, as if ignoring the situation would erase it. Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Not to complain. Not to argue. Not to expose anyone publicly. He typed one short message, read it once, and pressed send. Table 14. Observe service. That was all. As he waited, Malik's mind drifted briefly to the early days, long before chandeliers and reservation lists. He remembered serving customers himself, greeting everyone with the same warmth no matter what they ordered. He remembered telling his first small team, "If someone walks through our doors, they belong here." That belief hadn't changed. But people did. Comfort bred carelessness. Success sometimes dulled values. The waiter returned minutes later, dropping the bread basket on the table a little too hard. No apology. No eye contact. Malik simply nodded again. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't offended. He was watching. Because moments like these revealed the true culture of a place, not when the owner was announced, not when inspections were scheduled, but when no one thought accountability was present. Malik took a slow breath and folded his napkin neatly on his lap. The lesson was about to begin. Minutes later, the restaurant manager rushed out of the office, his polished confidence replaced by urgency. His eyes scanned the dining room, moving quickly from table to table, until they landed on Malik. In that instant, the color drained from his face. He straightened his jacket and walked over fast, too fast for someone trying to appear calm. "Mr. Johnson," he said, lowering his voice to almost a whisper. I didn't know you were coming tonight." Nearby diners leaned in. Conversation stopped again, this time with sharper curiosity. The name carried weight, even before the meaning landed. Malik stood slowly, not abruptly, not aggressively. Just enough to signal that this moment mattered. "I wanted to experience the restaurant as a guest," he said evenly. "Not as the owner." The word hung in the air. The manager swallowed hard, nodding as if the floor might open beneath him. His mind raced, staff schedules, training sessions, past complaints, everything suddenly felt fragile. Behind him, the waiter returned with a bread basket, mid-step, mid-motion. He froze when he saw the manager standing rigid beside Malik. "Owner," someone whispered from a nearby table. Another voice murmured, "He owns this place." The waiter's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the basket. His earlier confidence vanished, replaced by panic. He looked from Malik to the manager, then back again, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Malik turned to face him fully. His expression wasn't angry. That was the most unsettling part. "You asked if I could afford the steak," Malik said calmly. His voice was steady, controlled, but it carried. "I was curious, do you speak to every guest that way?" The waiter opened his mouth, then closed it. Words failed him. His face flushed. I didn't know," he finally stammered. "I'm sorry, sir. I really didn't know." Malik nodded once. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly the problem." The manager stepped in immediately, his voice tense. "This is unacceptable," he said. "Mr. Johnson, I sincerely apologize. This does not reflect our standards." Malik raised a hand, stopping him. "Standards aren't words," he said. "They're behaviors. And behaviors show up when no one thinks the owner is watching." The dining room was silent now. Even the kitchen noise seemed distant. Malik turned slightly, addressing not just the waiter, but the room. "I didn't announce myself tonight because I wanted honesty," he said. "Not performance." The waiter's shoulders slumped. He stared at the floor, ashamed, realizing too late that assumptions had cost him more than pride, they had exposed his character. Malik looked back at him. "You didn't disrespect me because I'm the owner," he said. "You disrespected me because you thought I was nobody." That sentence landed harder than any raised voice ever could. The manager nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. This wasn't a private issue to be smoothed over quietly. This was a lesson. Malik turned back toward his table and sat down. "I'll finish my meal," he said calmly. "Then we'll talk." The waiter stepped back, hands clasped tightly, unsure where to look. The manager stood there for a moment longer, then gestured for another staff member to take over the table. As Malik unfolded his napkin again, the room slowly exhaled. But nothing felt the same anymore. Because the truth was out now. And once truth enters a room, there's no pretending it didn't happen. Malik didn't shout. He didn't humiliate the waiter. That silence was worse, because it forced everyone in the room to listen, to think, to reflect. People shifted in their seats, realizing this wasn't a moment of drama, but a moment of truth. "I built this place to be welcoming," Malik said, his voice calm but carrying across the dining room. "Not impressive. Not intimidating. Welcoming." His eyes moved slowly from table to table. "Every guest matters, no matter how they dress, how they look, or what they order. Respect isn't something you earn here. It's something you receive the moment you walk through the door." The waiter's head dropped. His earlier arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by quiet shame. For the first time, he truly understood that the mistake wasn't just a comment, it was an attitude. Malik turned to the manager. "This isn't about punishment," he said firmly. "It's about standards. And standards only matter when they're enforced." The manager nodded immediately. "Understood," he said. The waiter was removed from the floor right away. Not fired on the spot, because Malik didn't believe fear created growth, but scheduled for retraining and placed on probation. Malik insisted the lesson be learned, not avoided. "If we discard people instead of correcting them," he said, "we become part of the problem." Staff members nearby exchanged glances. This wasn't how situations like this usually ended. There was no yelling. No public shaming. Just accountability, with purpose. Then Malik did something no one expected. He stood and walked to 3 nearby tables, the ones whose conversations had stopped, whose eyes had quietly witnessed everything. He smiled warmly. "Dinner is on me tonight," he said. "Thank you for sitting quietly with dignity." One woman placed a hand over her mouth, surprised. A man stood slightly and nodded in appreciation. "Thank you," he said. That meant something. Malik returned to his seat as the tension slowly dissolved. Conversations resumed, but they were different now. Softer. More thoughtful. People weren't just eating anymore. They were reflecting. The restaurant felt changed, even though nothing physical had moved. When Malik's steak arrived, cooked perfectly, he thanked the new server sincerely. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for the staff, this night would be remembered for a long time. Later, after Malik finished his meal, he asked the manager to gather the entire team, servers, hosts, kitchen staff, everyone. This restaurant didn't succeed because of chandeliers or prices, Malik said. It succeeded because people once felt welcome here. That can never change. He paused, letting his words settle. If anyone here believes respect depends on appearance, then you've misunderstood why this place exists. Heads nodded. Some eyes looked down, others shone with renewed purpose. The next morning, new training guidelines were announced. Every employee would go through customer respect workshops. Mystery visits would become routine. And one phrase would be added to the employee handbook, written by Malik himself. Assume nothing. Serve everyone with dignity. The story spread, not as a scandal, but as a lesson. A reminder that power doesn't need to be loud, and leadership doesn't need anger. Malik didn't come that night to prove who he was. He came to protect what he built. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that respect is not optional, it's foundational. Later that night, Malik sat alone again, finishing his meal. The same steak. Perfectly cooked. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, not scrolling on his phone, not distracted by the room. From the outside, he looked like any other guest winding down after dinner. But inside, he was reflecting, measuring whether the values he built this place on were still alive. The dining room had softened. Laughter sounded different now, less forced, more human. Servers moved with extra care, aware that every action mattered. Not because the owner was present, but because the lesson had landed. When Malik finished, he placed his napkin neatly beside the plate and stood. Instead of heading straight for the exit, he asked the manager to gather the staff. Word spread quickly. Within minutes, servers, hosts, and kitchen staff assembled near the back of the dining room, some nervous, some curious, all attentive. Malik stood before them, not elevated, not separated. This restaurant doesn't survive on chandeliers or prices, he said calmly. It survives on respect. No one spoke. Food brings people in, he continued. But how they're treated decides whether they ever come back. Every guest who walks through those doors carries a story you can't see. Never assume you know it. He looked around the group. Tonight wasn't about one mistake. It was about a reminder. If we lose our standards, we lose everything. The staff nodded. Some looked relieved. Others looked ashamed, but thoughtful. This wasn't a lecture meant to scare them. It was guidance meant to anchor them. Malik thanked them for their time and walked out quietly, no applause, no announcement. Just a man leaving a place he loved, trusting that the message would stay behind. The next week, changes began, not dramatically, but deliberately. New training policies were introduced. Every employee attended workshops focused on empathy, service, and unconscious bias. Managers were instructed to observe more and assume less. Mystery diners were added, not to punish, but to ensure consistency. One simple rule became the foundation of everything. Assume nothing, serve everyone with dignity. The phrase appeared in staff meetings, on internal memos, even framed discreetly in the break room. The story spread quickly. Not because someone was mocked, but because someone responded with class. Guests talked. Employees shared it with friends. Other restaurant owners asked questions. What stood out wasn't the insult, it was the restraint. Malik never gave interviews about it. He didn't post about it. He didn't need to. He understood something many people didn't: real authority doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when tested. Malik didn't need to tell the room who he was. The truth surfaced naturally, in its own time. And because of that, the lesson carried weight. It wasn't forced. It was earned. Weeks later, reviews of the restaurant began to change. Words like warm, respectful, and welcoming appeared more often than luxury or exclusive. Malik noticed, and smiled. Because success, to him, had never been about being feared or admired. It was about being fair. Sometimes, the strongest response isn't anger. It isn't volume. It isn't humiliation. Sometimes, the strongest response is ownership. Of your values. Of your standards. And of the example you set when no one expects it. And that kind of power doesn't fade when the night ends. It builds legacies. If this story touched your heart, like this video to support the message. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. And comment below, what lesson did you take from this story? Your support helps these stories reach more people. Thanks for watching.